Now, there's a lot I would like to share with you all today, especially talking about Donbass in East Ukraine and what does that look like with Russia going in there right now. Before we get to that, I would like to just talk about how embarrassing the integrity of Western media is, that they're not at all doing their jobs correctly. And maybe they're doing this so to the point that it's just obvious if someone that reads and don't just read what the Western media tells, but actually look at other shit, they can tell you for a fact that this is all bullshit. Here is a segment that I found interesting when I was watching Jimmy Dore talking about NBC and how they actually covered the training that Nazis are doing in Ukraine for working class citizens. So basically, you guys just basically showed neo-Nazi propaganda. Let me show you this. Take this for yourself.
Wrong with it. Okay, here we go.
Some communities are taking matters into their own hands. Just across from Russia, in the city of Mariupol, some Ukrainians are preparing basic training for the whole family.
See the badge that's on the soldier's arm right here at the bottom? The Azov Battalion. The Azov Battalion is a neo-Nazi group. You don't believe me? You can even Google this. It's not even hidden on Google. Here, let me show you. Make sure everyone's looking. Okay, good. So, you Google the Azov Battalion. It says here, Special Operation Detachment, other known as Azov Detachment or Azov Regiment or Azov Battalion, is a right-wing extremist and neo-Nazi Ukrainian National Guard unit. Okay. Now, if you look into this article here, not article, but if you look into the history here, Wikipedia shows you very clearly, that this whole battalion itself, it's not even originated from Ukraine. It actually has ties into Germany from its originality. So these are actual neo Nazis that come from Germany that spread this type of extremism that now they are building. Basically, they are the National Guard for Ukraine. Nazis are the National Guard for Ukraine. But this is just an aspect of so many other issues that is going on.
Well, tonight, the Russian military is on its way to the Donbass region after President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on the recognition of the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk. Now, Putin also saying the military is going in as peacekeepers because, frankly, and it's going to be obvious, Ukraine is not happy about this. In fact, immediately following Putin's announcement, celebrations were underway in the Donbass region, as you see there on the right side of your screen. On the left, that's Kiev, and it was oddly quiet, probably waiting on orders from the United States on what to do next. Well, what the United States is doing, though, is what it does every time a country does something it doesn't like: sanctions. Now, Putin's speech earlier was addressed not just to Russia, but to the entire world. And what do you know? Not one Western media outlet aired it. Some actually took clips from our own show in question and credited us as Russian state media. Now, why didn't they air it? Probably because they would have gotten a really good history lesson from the Russian president. His speech was not for the attention span of any American by far. It was very long, but it was a well-informed speech on the history of Russia and Ukraine's borders, going all the way back to the 1700s, to the Bolshevik Revolution, to Crimea in 2014.
Wow. So this speech did not make it to any Western airways. So automatically, if I do not know not to not to fully believe in Western media, but to check in on other news outlets that are not mainstream Western media, then I will be the fool to think that, oh my God, Russia is actually invading. Well, what actually is actually happening, you will hear stories about these people that who are speaking Russian and who are Ukrainian and who are being attacked, ridiculed for speaking Russian. It's very violent. One woman literally talked about how she literally lives in her basement for 8 years since the neo-Nazis took over um, the government that was backed by Israel and the United States. So this is literally fascism that's happening in the Ukraine, and it was actual the Russian speaking leaders, the Russian leaders that were in Donbass that begged for Putin to please help them. He didn't do this on his own. He was asked and begged. So that is why they're there. And I wanted to show this quick segment of Big Norton and his amazing speech in regards to this issue that's happening right now.
And it uses its veto at the UN Security Council to protect violators of international law, like Israel, you mentioned. We didn't even mention the war in Yugoslavia, where NATO destroyed this country and balkanized the country. And today, Bosnia and Herzegovina is basically run by an unelected bureaucrat appointed by the West. So the idea that the U.S. cares about international law to condemn Russia in this is ridiculous. We have to understand that Russia was in a very difficult situation, and it was pushed in this situation through a series of aggressive actions by the West at every single stage. We need to go back to the 2014 coup in Ukraine that is responsible for the people of Donetsk and Lugansk rising up. They rose up against a regime in Kiev installed by Washington, in which the third in command now of the State Department, Victoria Nuland, personally handpicked the leaders of the Ukrainian government. They immediately cracked down on Russian-speaking Ukrainians, which represents a huge percentage of the Ukrainian population. And the people in the eastern part of the country refused to be under this regime that was undemocratic, that was authoritarian, that had no sovereignty, and that was violating the rights of Russian speakers. So we have to understand that they were the ones who rose up. They were the ones who were asking Russia to be recognized. And now Russia has recognized them. Why? Because, as was acknowledged earlier, this is a reflection of Ukraine's failure to meet its commitments under the Minsk II agreement. Now, Minsk II was an agreement that goes back to 2015. This was an agreement brokered by Germany and France and Ukraine, and Russia was a signatory to this agreement as well. And Ukraine refused to meet its commitments. Its commitment said very clearly back in 2015 that Kiev had to allow for decentralization. It had to allow for autonomy for the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics in the eastern region. These are the Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine. And what was the response of Kiev and its masters in Washington? They ignored and violated the Minsk II agreement at every single stage and pushed Russia into this situation. So we have to understand all of that context to understand why.
So this gives me an understanding wholeheartedly of why Putin gave that speech of recognizing independence of the Donetsk and Lugansk people. And if I said that name incorrectly, I apologize. But what you're seeing is a region of Russian-speaking Ukrainians that are trying that do not agree with what is happening right now in Kiev, which is the national, the capital of Ukraine, of how it's being ran by Nazis. So they're saying we are dealing with a lot of backlash that has turned into violence against our people, because we do not agree with this government's choices into becoming a neo-Nazi ran type of place. So we need help to get the fuck out, away and separate from these guys. Why do we want to separate from these guys? Because we don't agree with their Nazism. Now, the United States has done this type of form of acknowledging other countries' independency multiple times as well too. Did we forget Golan Heights in Syria? How the United States literally allowed Israel to go into the sovereign country of Syria and occupy Golan Heights. They even renamed it, I believe, Trump Heights or some shit like that. What about Juan Guaido, who no one knew who the hell that was, or what was that about? No one in Venezuela knew who he was until the United States propped him up, and then all of a sudden he's the actual president of Venezuela. Excuse me. So for Putin to actually do this, I don't see what the problem is, and I see it's more beneficial in helping out people that are being persecuted just for speaking Russian, and while living in a Nazi type of format of control in that country. This is it's a good idea. I would do the same thing if I was Putin. Why? Because no one deserves to be dealing with that type of persecution. They talk about all this shit that goes on in the world, but all of our allies in this government ignore what their allies are doing. Ukraine would never be a part of NATO. The NATO needs to be disbanded. I will say that to this day until I am old. And this is just another fact of the situation of what's happening. I saw on the Indian news that they said that Putin has an obsession with Ukraine. I don't see that. But what I do see is that a lot of working class people are going to be affected and harmed by the negligence of what the United States like to do when they want to stroke their power. And this is what's happening right now. I don't see anything wrong with Donbass being protected by Russia. I don't see anything wrong with another country deciding to protect a culture of people. What I see wrong is that a country that has a history of colonialization uses Ukraine as a puppet to stroke their ego against Russia and against any other country that goes against the United States imperialist power. That is evil. What this government is doing, what my taxes pay for, what your taxes pay for if you're American, is evil incarnate. And that narrative needs to be broken.